Every painting you have ever seen of Jesus is wrong. Not wrong spiritually, not wrong artistically, wrong historically. The image is so familiar that most people never stop to question it. Long brown hair, light skin, soft European facial features, blue or hazel eyes, a tall, almost ethereal figure standing apart from everyone around him. That image has appeared in churches, movies, stained glass windows, Sunday school books, and paintings for centuries. But there is one major problem. There is almost no evidence that Jesus looked anything like that. In fact, nearly every piece of historical evidence we possess points in a completely different direction. And the deeper historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, and biblical scholars investigate the question, the clearer the picture becomes. The historical Jesus almost certainly looked less like a Renaissance painting and far more like an ordinary Jewish laborer living under Roman occupation in the 1st century. Today, we are going to follow the evidence. Not speculation, not tradition. Evidence. We'll look at what the Bible says, what archaeology reveals, what anthropology tells us, what ancient Jewish customs indicate, and how one particular image of Jesus eventually spread across the world and became so dominant that billions of people now imagine him in a way that history does not support. The answer is fascinating, and it says as much about us as it does about Jesus. Let's begin with an obvious question. If Jesus was the most influential person in human history, why didn't anyone describe what he looked like? The answer is surprisingly simple, because the people who wrote the New Testament didn't think physical appearance mattered. Ancient biographies were often very different from modern biographies. Today, if a famous person emerged, journalists would immediately describe height, weight, clothing, hairstyle, facial features, and mannerisms. Ancient writers were usually more interested in character than appearance. As a result, the Gospels tell us almost nothing about Jesus' physical features. No eye color, no hair color, no height, no weight, no skin tone, nothing. The silence is striking. If the Gospel writers believed appearance was important for understanding Jesus, they had every opportunity to tell us, yet they chose not to. The closest thing many people point to is Isaiah 53. Written centuries before Jesus, it describes the suffering servant. There was no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. Now, Isaiah is not providing a physical description in the modern sense, but the passage does suggest something important. Jesus was not unusually attractive. He was not physically extraordinary. He was not someone who immediately stood out in a crowd. In other words, his appearance was probably ordinary, and that observation aligns with something else found in the Gospels. Think about the night of Jesus' arrest. The Garden of Gethsemane, torches flickering in the darkness, Roman soldiers arriving, temple guards moving through the olive trees. Judas approaches Jesus, then he kisses him. That kiss becomes the identifying signal. Why? Because the arresting party needed help identifying Jesus. Pause for a moment and think about that. If Jesus looked dramatically different from everyone around him, the kiss would have been unnecessary. Imagine a group of Middle Eastern men standing together at night. Now, imagine one man among them is 6 feet tall, pale-skinned, with flowing auburn hair and distinctly European features. Nobody would need a signal. Nobody would need identification. He would stand out instantly. But that is not what happened. Instead, Judas had to indicate which man was Jesus. That fact doesn't tell us exactly what Jesus looked like, but it strongly suggests that he looked broadly similar to the people around him. That matters, because now we can begin asking a better question. If Jesus looked like other Jewish men from first-century Galilee, what did those men actually look like? Jesus grew up in Galilee, a region in the northern part of Roman Judea. This was not Europe. It was not Renaissance Italy. It was not medieval England. It was the Eastern Mediterranean, a crossroads of cultures, a place shaped by Jewish traditions, Roman occupation, and Near Eastern heritage. Most people were poor. Many worked with their hands. Life expectancy was significantly lower than today. Nutrition was inconsistent. Medical care was limited. People spent enormous amounts of time outdoors under the sun. The physical realities of life left visible marks on the human body. To understand Jesus, we must first understand his environment, because environment influences appearance. Skin tone, body type, height, hair texture, even facial structure over generations. And this is where archaeology becomes incredibly useful. In the 20th century, archaeologists uncovered numerous skeletal remains from Jewish populations living in the first century. These remains gave anthropologists valuable information about the average physical characteristics of people living in Roman Judea. One of the most well-known reconstruction efforts was led by forensic anthropologist Richard Neave. Rather than attempting to reconstruct Jesus specifically, Neave reconstructed the face of a statistically typical Jewish man from first-century Galilee. His team combined skeletal data with forensic facial reconstruction techniques. They also incorporated evidence from ancient portraiture and historical sources. The resulting face shocked many people, not because it was controversial, because it looked realistic. The reconstructed individual had dark eyes, dark hair, olive-brown skin, a broad face, a strong nose, a short beard, features commonly seen throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East. The reconstruction was never claimed to be Jesus. That is important. No scientist has reconstructed Jesus's actual face. That would be impossible. But the reconstruction offers something arguably more valuable: a realistic baseline, a historically grounded picture of what an average male from Jesus's population likely looked like. And that picture looks nothing like most traditional Western paintings. One detail surprises many people: height. Popular culture often portrays Jesus as tall and imposing. Historical evidence suggests otherwise. Based on skeletal remains from the period, the average male height in Roman Judea appears to have been roughly between 5 feet 1 inch and 5 feet 5 inches. By modern standards, that's relatively short. Jesus may have been taller, he may have been shorter. We simply don't know. But statistically speaking, there is no reason to imagine him towering above everyone around him. In fact, the most historically responsible assumption is that he was close to average, an ordinary man in an ordinary body, which ironically aligns perfectly with the gospel message. The extraordinary thing about Jesus was never his appearance, it was who he was. Before we continue, we're about to uncover how the familiar European image of Jesus became dominant across the world, and the story is far more political than most people realize. If you enjoy historically grounded Bible content, subscribe to Bible Depths. Every Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday, we explore overlooked details, ancient contexts, archaeological discoveries, and surprising evidence that can completely change how you read Scripture. Subscribe and join us. Now, let's continue. Perhaps the most recognizable feature of traditional Jesus paintings is long hair. But was Jesus likely to have had long hair? The evidence suggests probably not. One of the strongest clues comes from the writings of Paul.
In 1 Corinthians 11:14, Paul asks, "Does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is a disgrace for him?" Now, Paul is discussing cultural norms, but that is exactly the point. He assumes his audience already understands long hair on men as socially inappropriate. Paul was a first-century Jewish man. His cultural assumptions matter. If long hair was considered unusual among men, then the probability that Jesus regularly wore extremely long hair becomes much lower. Historical evidence points in the same direction. Men generally wore relatively short hair and maintained beards. Not modern military cuts, but not the shoulder-length hair seen in later Christian art. Which raises another question. Where did the long-haired Jesus
come from? Many people assume Jesus had long hair because he was called a Nazarene. But this is actually a misunderstanding. A Nazarene was someone from Nazareth. A Nazarite was someone who took a specific religious vow. These are completely different things. The Nazarite vow included abstaining from cutting one's hair. Famous Nazarites included Samson. John the Baptist may also have lived under Nazarite-like practices. Jesus, however, regularly drank wine, touched the dead, and participated in activities inconsistent with a Nazarite vow. Nothing in the New Testament suggests he was a Nazarite. Yet, over time, the distinction became blurred, and that confusion helped reinforce artistic traditions depicting Jesus with long hair. Historically speaking, the evidence points towards shorter hair than most paintings portray. This is where the story becomes fascinating. Early Christians did not have a universally agreed image of Jesus. Different regions depicted him differently. Some early images show him beardless. Others show him with short hair. Others portray him symbolically rather than realistically. Then something changed. As Christianity expanded throughout the Roman Empire, artists increasingly borrowed familiar visual language from surrounding cultures. If you wanted viewers to recognize divinity, wisdom, authority, and transcendence, you used visual symbols people already understood. One source of influence appears to have been depictions of Apollo. Another came from representations of philosophers and wise men. Long hair, idealized facial symmetry, serene expressions, noble posture. These artistic choices communicated meaning. They were theological statements, not historical reconstructions. Eventually, these artistic conventions became standard. Then medieval Europe inherited them. Then Renaissance artists amplified them. Then colonial expansion exported them across the globe. And before long, billions of people associated Jesus with European features, not because evidence supported it, because art repeated it for centuries. Images carry power. They shape assumptions. They influence identity. They communicate belonging. When Christianity spread through European empires, European depictions of Jesus often traveled alongside it. Missionaries arrived in Africa, Asia, the Americas, and the Pacific, carrying paintings and illustrations. Many converts encountered a Jesus who looked remarkably similar to Europeans. Over time, this subtly communicated an unintended message: that holiness looked European, that authority looked European, that divinity looked European. Whether intentional or not, those visual associations had consequences. The historical Jesus disrupts that narrative.
He was not a member of the ruling empire. He belonged to a people living under occupation. He belonged to a people living under colonization. He spoke Aramaic. He lived among Jewish villagers. He looked like the population Rome governed, not the population doing the governing. That historical reality matters, not because appearance determines truth, but because truth matters. Another clue comes from language. Jesus' primary language was almost certainly Aramaic. He likely knew Hebrew for religious purposes. He may have known some Greek. Everything about his daily life was rooted in the culture of first-century Jewish Palestine. The food he ate, the clothes he wore, the houses he entered, the roads he walked, the people he interacted with. All of it points towards a distinctly Middle Eastern context. And when we remove centuries of later artistic tradition, the historical picture becomes increasingly clear. Jesus was not European. He was Jewish, first-century Jewish. That distinction is crucial. Some people hear all of this and ask, does it really matter? In one sense, no. The gospel is not about skin color. The resurrection does not depend on hair length. Salvation is not determined by facial structure. But in another sense, it matters profoundly. Because truth matters. Historical honesty matters. And because the image we carry in our minds shapes how we understand the story. When Jesus becomes detached from his historical setting, we risk misunderstanding the world he actually lived in. We risk forgetting that Christianity emerged from a Jewish context. We risk overlooking the realities of Roman occupation. We risk turning Jesus into a figure made in our own image. The historical Jesus challenges every culture equally. He does not belong exclusively to Europe, or Asia, or Africa, or the Americas. He belongs to history, and ultimately, according to Christian belief, to all humanity. So what did Jesus actually look like? We cannot know with complete certainty. No portrait survives. No ancient eyewitness description exists. No ancient photograph was taken. But the evidence allows us to make informed conclusions. Jesus was almost certainly a first-century Jewish man, with olive-brown skin, dark eyes, dark hair, a beard, average height, ordinary appearance, a man who blended into crowds, a man who looked like the people of Galilee, not the pale-skinned figure of Renaissance art, not the blue-eyed image of later European tradition, but a Jewish man from an occupied corner of the Roman Empire. And perhaps that realization invites a deeper question. If so much of what we imagine about Jesus comes from culture rather than history, what else have we absorbed without realizing it? That question is worth thinking about. Let me know in the comments, does learning this change how you picture Jesus? I'd genuinely like to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoy historically grounded Bible investigations, subscribe to Bible Depths. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And don't miss our next video, Revelation Episode 5. Until next time, keep digging deeper. Jesus Christ is King, and He loves you.